You'll see in our separate video on Below the Radar the story of Peel Engineering, and how it wasn't just about the P50, there's a whole load of other cars there as well. And Peel's final car was the Viking, which is where the other video ends. But the story doesn't end there. I'm here with Darren Cunningham, again from the Isle of Man Motor Museum, who's going to start us off on a really fascinating story about plastic minis. And this here is well, where it all started.
Yes. So if we take a slight step back, the Peel Viking was effectively a kit car based on the Mini. And in early '66, there was one on display at a show in the UK. And some guys from BMC came along and were very interested into, this fiberglass, effectively fiberglass-bodied Mini. The reason was they were looking to expand production of the Mini overseas, and specifically into South America, and they were looking at Chile. Now, there was restrictions or tax benefits depending on the amount of locally produced content in the car. And one of the simplest ways to do that, and also for transport, not having to send a body shell across, was to make a fiberglass body for that Mini locally. BMC then, because they'd seen the Viking, contracted Peel to produce some prototype body shells and moulds for this project. And this is one of those prototype body shells here in our collection.
And it's one of how many?
So there was at least one complete car finished, which is known as the green car, and there's period photos of that being tested at Longbridge on their torsion testing rig, and it's believed that was then repainted white and was crash tested at Mira. This car had been rumoured to survive, or this body shell had been rumoured to survive for many, many years. We've been trying to find it for about 8-10 years, and it's come into the collection here in early 2024. At least 3 moulds were made, maybe more. It's a little bit unclear. In total, Peel were involved in this project for about 3 months only, and once their involvement ended, everything was basically packaged up and sent over to BMC.
What surprises me about it is how well made it is. It's been stuck in the undergrowth for decades, and yet it's still completely intact. Yeah. Also, looking around it, it looks exactly like a Mini steel body shell. Is it a direct replacement, or are there differences? So
there are some differences, and going on to how well it was made, that was why BMC had contacted Peel. They really did know what they were doing. They were good at fiberglass work. The differences on this car kind of mainly to do with how you produce fiberglass against how you produce a steel-bodied car. So, the seams that normally are on a Mini don't need to exist here, the welding seams. There's other little tweaks. The shape of the side of the car was modified so that it was easier to mould and demould it. We actually have one of the original moulds for this in our collection now as well. We were able to save it when we saved this car.
More production lines beckon.
Well, exactly.
At the museum, by the sounds of it.
And then one of the kind of really obvious ways to kind of tell the later production cars, that there were later prototypes done in the UK from the Isle of Man ones, is actually the shape of the wheel arch. It's a very distinct difference there.
Okay, and it just so happens that you have a fully up and running plastic Mini in your main hall, yes, which demonstrates that fact.
Yes.
I think we should go and take a look.
Perfect.
Okay. So from one piece of history to another, we just saw the Peel Engineering prototype glass fibre Mini, which was never finished. You dug it out of a hedge, but this is one that was actually built up into a running car. What's the story behind it? So
this car is the next step along in that Fibergalss Mini project. This is produced by Press Steel Fisher, part of BMC, and it was one of 6 that they built using basically modified Peel moulds. I mentioned there were slight differences in the wheel arches. You can see on these they're very distinct, sort of square, and they run into the sill. It's kind of the tell between the earlier Peel produced cars and the Press Steel Fisher cars. Of the 6 shells that Press Steel Fisher manufactured, 3 were built up into complete cars. The 3 other shells, 2 were destroyed. One of them somehow escaped out of the factory and was used to reshell a Mini Cooper at some stage, and that car is still around. And of those 3 original cars, this one survives, and at least one other does still survive.
Okay, and this one's seen quite a lot of action. It's actually been used on the road and clocked up quite a few miles.
Yes, so once BMC were done with it, they sold it on to Fibergalss Limited, part of Pilkington Glass, and they were suppliers of fiberglass to Peel Engineering, and they used it for an extended period to kind of prove the durability of fiberglass bodied cars. So this had over 100,000 miles on the clock, this car.
And how is it fared? I mean, I can see some star cracks and some crazing, but that's solid. That's solid. That feel to the point where you wonder, this isn't any lighter than the steel one.
No,
probably.
this is heavier than the steel car.
Okay, but it probably doesn't rust as badly.
You'd hope.
Okay, so is it fair to say that this is a direct replacement for the steel body shell, and that everything was carried over and changed into a plastic body shell?
I think a lot was carried over, but it's there's still, again, there's design tweaks that were made because it is fiberglass and it is a different material. So again, the seams are missing in certain places. It was also a prototype, this particular car, so it's got a mix of things like Mark I and Mark II Mini parts on it. The dashboard is from a Riley Elf. So it was an experimental car, and actually this car carried initially an experimental chassis number, an EX number. When it was sold out to Fibergalss Limited, BMC gave it a regular production chassis number, but they gave it one earlier than the first production Mini from 1959.
Maybe this is actually like 10 years earlier than they thought it was, and it came out in 1956.
Not exactly. It could be the first ever Mini.
It could well be. Proper piece of history. So what became of the project?
So they went into production in Chile. They used Peel molds for at least, I think it was a couple of hundred cars, and then they started making some locally produced molds out there, and the project's...
And this is in Chile?
In Chile, yeah.
So in Chile it went into production.
Yeah.
And wasn't there a parallel project in other parts of South America? Yes, available
later on. So this whole project was sort of in the late 60s, early 70s, and then in the early 90s, for kind of similar reasons, I believe, to do with import duties and so on. They were looking to build fiberglass minis in Venezuela, and they actually used some of these earlier fiberglass minis as kind of the reference as to how to do this, and they were in production from about, I think, 91 to 95, and something like 1,300 cars produced, again, for Venezuela, Colombia, and some other South American markets.
Okay, so the car isn't quite up and running yet, is it? You've just acquired it, very new to the collection, but it's on the cusp of being ready to be run. So if you want to see a proper piece of Mini history in the plastic, get along to the Isle of Man Motor Museum, and later this summer, that's summer 2024, you should be able to see it, certainly here on display, but possibly even, maybe,
on the road.
Fingers crossed, up and running.